Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staying, a video and podcast production series produced by Louisiana Now here inside the Louisiana Conference. I am your host, Todd Rossnagel, the Director of Communications for the Louisiana Conference. Thank you so much for tuning in. In this particular episode, I wanted to spend some time with our co-host for the entire series, and that is the Reverend Dr. Van Stinson, who is the assistant to the bishop and the director of clergy excellence and really the chief of staff here at the conference office. And Van, thank you for your participation in today's episode, but really thank you for your participation in this entire series.
Well, thank you, Todd. It's good to be with you, and thank you for all that you're doing in this process. I think it's a blessing to have someone who so dedicated and committed to making this type of information available to all of our annual conference.
Well, and as I said in the episode with Bishop Hari, I often joke that I'm just the communicator. That's not to diminish the role of a communicator,
not at all.
But it is helpful to have your insight for each of these episodes. So I thank you for that. Why is this so important to you? You have a lot of other things you could be doing. Why is this important? Why is this entire series important?
Well, I mean, you just sort of start with the current experience and then maybe fill in with some of the backstory. We're kind of in unprecedented times in the United Methodist Church, and that language can be overused, but I think it's important to say. I mean, this is, in the current context, in our lifetime, it is unprecedented. In my role as assistant to the bishop, and in navigating the dynamics of an annual conference that is made up of a diversity of folks all across the political and theological spectrum, traditionalists, centrists, progressives, all those labels that we will talk about, how, we don't have a lot of other language we can use, so we use those labels. But we are a very diverse annual conference that for many, many years has I think found common ground, and we have been able to relate to one another in shared mission and ministry across those theological differences and those political distinctions that oftentimes, and especially in this current season, have so come to dominate and become so divisive. That having been said, as we entered into this season of discernment around disaffiliation, it became apparent to me that there were those in other places outside of Louisiana, for the most part, who were working hard to promote churches leaving the United Methodist Church, who themselves had already left and had gone to different places. And yet we're still trying to impact and affect the decisions and the discernment of good and faithful Louisiana United Methodist. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, so many of those, in my mind, those videos and those statements filled with half-truths, untruths, misinformation, were being seen by many in our annual conference as being
true,
normative and true,
right.
And accepted and what they should use to base, the information to base their decisions upon. And I became very frustrated by that and felt like at a minimum we ought to be doing something to help get some information out there that was specific to our context here in Louisiana, that were not outside voices, whether promoting disaffiliation or remaining United Methodist, but hearing from folks within our own annual conference talk about what we are doing, how we are seeking to navigate this process fairly, faithfully, equitably, with a sense of respect and honoring who we are and who we are as an annual conference. So there was that, origin for why I thought this would be a good thing. Very personally, I was not raised a United Methodist. I chose to become a United Methodist in my college years, and ended up going to seminary, ended up being appointed into a United Methodist Church, have spent the vast majority of my professional life, serving in the United Methodist Church. I love this church. The very things that many are speaking ill against those aspects about the United Methodist Church are the very things that drew me to the United Methodist Church. And so to hear folks misrepresenting the experience of so many of us who have found a home, a place of service, and an identity as a proud United Methodist Christian. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus. I happen to be a United Methodist. And in my mind, I see those two going hand in hand. So out of my own experience, I'm pretty passionate about helping folks understand the great gift that United Methodism is to the world, and more specifically to the Louisiana Conference.
And just as a quick aside for our audience at home, as much as I am thankful for Van and his role inside the conference and all that he does here, in our previous episode, I was talking about how I went into a meeting. I was not a United Methodist, and went into a meeting accused of asking way too many questions for some other denominations. And it was Van Stinson, who said, "Welcome to the United Methodist Church."
Yes.
It was 21 years ago at First United Methodist Church of Baton Rouge, where you were appointed. It was 21 years ago.
21 years. Wow.
I know, it's crazy.
Neither of us has aged a bit in those
of course
21
not.
years.
It was, welcome to a place where asking questions is embraced, and where you can feel comfortable doing that. So that was just a quick aside. But you and I, prior to kind of thinking through this series and talking about it, we really kind of wrestled with what are we going to call this, and we landed on the word staying. And I think that was important because in a time where there is sadly some conversations about potentially leaving the denomination, by golly, we should be talking about what it means to stay and talk to people who are staying.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I lost my mother almost a year ago. Be October the 3rd, be 1 year. And, my mother gets wiser the older I get. And it's been amazing during this season of my work life. Many of my mother's, lessons that she taught me early on have become much more relevant. And one of the things that my mother taught my brother and me growing up is, if you can't say something positive that you stand for, and all you've got to say is something negative against whatever it is,
don't say anything.
Then don't say anything.
Right.
And so much of what's out there is all about what's wrong with the United Methodist Church, with the bishops, with centrists and progressives. Tell me what's right.
Yeah.
And many of us who are choosing to stay are staying because we believe there's so much right and so much positive and so much to offer the world through the Wesleyan witness in the United Methodist Church. So I think that talking about staying is actually what we ought to be talking about. Why is it that we're staying? What does it mean for us to stay? And why we think others ought to stay as well.
So we are taping this after having taped several of our episodes. So we wanted to give folks at home just kind of a snapshot of some of the people that we're going to speak to and that you're going to hear from in the coming days and weeks ahead. We thought it was important to talk to one of our 4 district superintendents, Reverend Carly Pigeon from the Alexandria district. And we thought it would be important to talk to Carly for a number of different reasons, but primarily because Carly, as all of our district superintendents are doing, is involved in the process at that ground level, that discernment process that's happening in some churches. Not every church has to have you don't have to be going through this if you're staying, but she is in the trenches, if you will. Yeah, and we were intentional as an annual conference about setting up a process that started with the district superintendent. Yeah, that's the first step in the process. Call your DS. Step 1, call your district superintendent. Because that relationship between a district superintendent and the congregations over which he or she serves and supervises, it is really already an established relationship with mutual trust and understanding in most all of the instances. And so it's just a natural place for any sort of discernment
process to begin. And so having Carly help lay out how the process is going for her in her district, the Alexandria district, as well as being able to speak for the other 3 district superintendents who work alongside of her, I think will be very helpful for folks to understand the process, and then also be able to balance that with some of the misinformation that they will hear and read.
And also another episode that we're going to give you, and you mentioned this earlier, and we're going to mention it a couple of different times, that we don't have the right language. All language at some point falls apart as far as language to classify people.
Yeah.
But we wanted to talk to someone on both sides of the issue, center right, center left, whatever those labels are. And one of those is Reverend Weldon Barres from Lake Charles, and he would be classified, and I know this because he's already said he would classify himself as center-right.
Sure.
And it's important to get his perspective, because I think one of the rumors, one of the pieces of misinformation out there is that if you have a differing opinion on same-gender marriage, that there is no place for you in the future United Methodist Church, and nothing could be farther from the truth.
Absolutely. And Weldon does a wonderful job of framing that from his perspective. Weldon's been in the annual conference a long time, one of our senior leaders, I might say.
Sure.
Solid traditionalist, and self-avowed, we might say. He claims it and owns it, and yet also a proud United Methodist. And for him, there's no question that those two can and do coexist in some beautiful and wonderful ways. I think Weldon, his witness to his own understanding and position on same-gender marriage, as well as his honor and respect of fellow clergy colleagues and other congregations in other contexts that can read Scripture and arrive at somewhat of a different perspective on that. He's not leaving, and yet doesn't plan on performing a same-gender wedding. And I think it's important for that witness to be heard in the current climate that says you better go fast, because there's not going to be a place for traditionalist clergy or laity in the United Methodist Church. That's just patently false.
And then on the kind of political opposite of him, we talked to a progressive pastor, and that's Reverend Jay Hogwood from Rain Memorial United Methodist Church in New Orleans. And one of the things the reasons that we wanted to reach out to Jay is some of the misinformation out there that somehow and this really, I think, got under both of our skin. This idea that the United Methodist Church is not taking the Bible seriously. This idea of Scripture authority. What does the authority of Scripture mean? And fasten your seatbelts, because when you get Jay and Van talking about authority of Scripture, it's a fascinating conversation, but it's an important conversation at the same time.
Sure. It's easy to assume in the current context with the current rhetoric that's out there that either you fall into a very narrow category of people, ironically, that agree in lockstep with the people promoting this misinformation, that you don't believe the Bible, you don't believe in the authority of Scripture, and in many respects and in so many ways, it's offensive.
Yeah.
And so to be able to have again, labels, as we've talked about, a progressive pastor, at least in terms of the church's understanding of human sexuality. Rain Memorial United Methodist Church in New Orleans is a reconciling congregation. They are also a congregation that believes in the authority of Scripture, studies the Bible, and Jay himself, has a PhD in Hebrew Bible. So as we jokingly say, we've got more degrees in Bible than ever serves us well in the world. But to be able to once again say you can be progressive and be a faithful student of the Scriptures, seeking to live by them and to live with them as they inform and shape your life and your witness. I think that's an important word to hear in the current climate.
And in the midst of all of this, we knew it was important to include the voice of someone who is gay.
Sure.
And Jessica Trahan, who's involved in student ministry in Lafayette, was able to join us. And it's important to have her viewpoint, and also important to hear her story.
Yeah, and so often the reality is that we end up, meaning the those involved in the conversation, end up talking about people rather than to them and with them.
Right.
You know, that's a danger in any situation, but most specifically in this current climate. Jessica brings such a deep faith, a level of humility that many of us could only hope to have, just in the way in which she shares her story and herself, and how for the last 50 years, many like her have chosen to stay in the United Methodist Church, even as the incompatibility language became ingrained in our life and history, and even as the more punitive language began to take form and shape as the debate became more and more divisive. And yet even now, during this season of discernment, when one could certainly accept the fact that they, meaning LGBT persons, would choose to leave and start a denomination that would be more open and accepting than even the United Methodist Church remains to be to this day. You certainly could understand that, and yet they're staying. Yeah. She's staying. I think it'll be an important voice to have in this conversation.
And another important voice is the chair of the Louisiana delegation. These are the people that we have voted to, that the annual conference has voted to represent Louisiana Conference at both jurisdictional conference and general conference. And the chair, of course, Reverend Brady Whitten from First Church in Baton Rouge. And he's also chair of the Board of Ordained Ministry. And there's a lot being said right now about, these progressive seminaries are just cranking out graduates, and all of a sudden you've got this very progressive pastor who's just going to be fast-tracked into being a pastor at your local church. And, hold your horses. Yeah. There's a process to all of this, and there's gates for everybody that has to go through this system, and he'll provide some insight on that.
Well, and Brady offers that the perspective more broadly understood, that, as you said, we have a process. Yeah. We have a process for assessing, credentialing, licensing, ordaining, and deploying clergy in the United Methodist Church. And whether you come from the most conservative, even bordering on fundamental, perspective and theological orientation, you may have gone to a seminary that certainly would not have been placed in the camp of liberal schools of theology. To the other extreme of that, if you were a very progressive person, politically, theologically, and attended one of the most liberal or perceived liberal progressive schools of theology, for both of those and all those in between, there is a process that we all must go through that determines whether or not we can clearly articulate a Wesleyan theological understanding of the Scriptures, of life, of ministry, and understand what those parameters are. And I think you even referred to it as, what are the riverbanks? Yeah. Here we are on the, on the banks of the Mississippi River. So wonderful image. But always understanding that those banks allow for the river to rise and fall and move. And we honor and celebrate those tensions of interpreting Scripture and applying it to our lives, no matter what educational background we have, theological or political perspective. That process ensures that United Methodist history, doctrine, and polity will be clearly understood and able to be articulated and followed, as we're deployed into appointments within the annual conference.
So one of the questions that we're going to be asking all of our guests, and we in many ways also ask you at home the same question of where do you see hope? Where do you see hope? Speaking to the people at home, where do you see hope? Because we'd like to hear from you. So please comment on this video and other future videos on where you see hope inside the United Methodist Church. But Van, I would like to ask you that question. Where do you see hope?
Yeah, I think I see it in two places, lots of places, but I'll highlight those two. I think, first of all, I see hope in those who are still answering the call to ministry, whether they are clergy candidates, who are going through the process and discerning a call to some form of ministry, whether it's lay people who are being drawn into the life and ministry of a United Methodist Church somewhere in the state. God is still calling people, and people are still finding their way and their place in this marvelous tradition known as, the Wesleyan tradition, in this flawed but yet profoundly faithful denomination known as the United Methodist Church. I see hope in that. Secondly, for all of the rumors and misinformation to the contrary.
There's rumors?
Apparently so, yes. And even more so than rumors, just misinformation.
Lies.
We could just name it for what it is. Often being couched in high doses of piety and profound, faithfulness to the Scriptures.
Yeah. And a whole lot of clickbait.
Yeah. That we have a system in place that gets a lot of criticism, whether it's the bishops that get both credit and blame for things that they deserve neither for, but it's just the role that they are in. Annual conferences, cabinets, who again get accused of an awful lot of things, and the system itself is being undermined with having no integrity or credibility, and yet it is that very system that continues to serve us in helping individuals and local churches discern their future and what is the best decision for them. That system has served us faithfully since the time of John Wesley.
Yeah.
And it will continue to serve us. And no matter what people argue to the contrary, I think the system has withstood the test of time. And if we are faithful to it and honor those riverbanks that it provides, then we will be able to navigate these waters that we are currently in, I think, to a more fruitful and faithful future.
Well, thank you for your time, your dedication to this series. We look forward to your insight in all of these different episodes. And thank you for 21 years ago seeing this big tall guy walking into a Sunday school class and having a lot of questions and saying that's okay to have a lot of odd questions. So
and thank you for continually asking those questions.
Well, we continue to answer the call, don't we?
We do.
In whatever way, shape, or form that call presents itself. So, and thank you for you at home joining us for this entire series. We look forward to sharing all of these episodes with you, and we also look forward to hearing from you. Your opinion matters. Your opinion is sought after, so please leave us a comment and share these episodes on your social media channels of choice, as we'd like everyone to be a part of this important series. Thanks again for joining us. For William Willoughby, who's behind the scenes producing this series, for Van Stinson, and for all of our future guests here on this series, I'm Todd Rossnagel. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day, everyone.